Welcome back on The Leaders Who Care, where we actually interview and speak with some of the most accomplished, some of the most successful leaders of this world in their field in the hot seat to uncover real and often controversial insights. As you know, I'm always stepping into the shoes of a skeptical leader to question my guests. Today, Roy joins us once more as I step into a role of a skeptical CFO, grilling Roy about the real value of transformation and the financial justification. So, joining our hot seat today is Roy Hughes, a DHL powerhouse, former DHL actually, with a strong label of people's leader, and really is somebody that has made a profound difference. For those of you who haven't met Roy led a large-scale operation transformation, delivering a significant impact in high-paced environment. Over 10 billion profit and loss responsibility, and he's led a major business turnaround, driving a loss-making into a profitability, a productivity and quality improvements. His leadership span over 42 countries, overseeing close to 40,000 employees. Really excited to have you back, Roy. Really welcome back on the yet another episode on the Leaders Who Care.
Thank you, Marian. It's good to be here. It's good to have these conversations.
Well, today, actually, we're going to talk about transformation and what's different in 2025 in business transformation and why that transformation feels like a treadmill. Organizations, as you know, have been transforming for decades. In fact, almost every company is transforming every year. So at least that's what it should be, continuous improvement. Yet many still face declining growth, increasing complexities. So are we stuck chasing change without delivering results? Why is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, the pace of transformation has increased significantly as our digital capability within businesses has equally become more and more prevalent. And we're seeing today in the world with AI, we went from simple robotics to AI and everything else. First of all, I think the first piece is the necessity for transformation. Because if you're not really transforming, if you're not changing, then you're not keeping up with the world as the world evolves and change speeds up. So, the biggest question of, first of all, okay, but why transformation? A number of them don't work. They don't go as smooth as possible. In all honesty, in all the years that I've sat as a board director now for over 25 years, and certainly as a senior leader for much longer than this, the few things that you learn as you're going through these, the number one, change is a necessity. As new technologies come on board, even if you look at the leadership, how that's evolved over the years, how it went from management, which was about control, how it then went to lead management, how it went to management control with a little bit of influencing. And now everything that people talk about is leadership. The fact that you would influence people, the fact that you basically get people to become the best version of themselves to get the best level of performance. This in itself was a huge commercial transformation from back where we were within the 80s into the 90s and through to where we are today. So most of transformation for me fails or doesn't work because of mindset, first and foremost. The person leading the transformation has to believe that the transformation is a necessity and the direction it's going in is the right direction. Because as that leader, if people believe that you believe, they will equally believe. It makes the story more credible. So it's got to be authentic. It's got to be sincere. It has to have purpose. So from my point of view, I think, Marian, when we look at this whole topic of transformation, you see, and I'll put it as simple as this, in the world of e-commerce that we've seen come and grow from strength to strength. When I saw the early days when we were talking with companies like Gymshark, working from his garage in Birmingham, or being able to open up markets in the US where they are huge today, etc., etc. You had companies who basically said, going online and doing e-commerce isn't our thing. We're a traditional commercial shop. And what happened is a number of them have gone bankrupt. Because they never kept up with the times, the fact that people could go onto an e-commerce platform, not have all the infrastructure costs of high street shops and people and all of this kind of stuff, it made the e-commerce element more effective and cost
Right.
effective.
Since a lot of transformation fail, I mean, that should not necessarily stop us. And you mentioned why they fail, because of mindset. So here, how do we, talking from a CFO standpoint of view, clearly the CFOs have a different approach to transformation. They want to see real numbers, real saving. But when you look at people and engagement, is the other side of it, because you can look at Excel spreadsheets, but these sometimes very often completely ignoring what the people's engagement in workforce is. And you've been very good in engaging the workforce. So where is the fine balance of really just numbers cutting and transforming to see the positive EBIT versus the long-term success or preventing from complete failure? Because sometimes the transformation, or often transformations fail.
Yeah, I think the first thing you've got to understand, right, with all kind of transformations, is you've got to almost have a vision of what you want to be, the identity, what you want to be post transformation, whether that's more efficient, more productive, whether it's a positioning in the marketplace, whether it's a positioning in quality, product, or anything else. You've got to have a vision that says this is what we want to be, which gives it purpose. The element that you're talking about, which is where it does fall down, is the communication element. The fact of the matter is, we were talking previously, if you go back 15 years ago, transformational change was called managing change. The whole reason why now it's transformational change is because when you transform something from one thing to another, you're not managing a change. You're actually changing the identity of what you're changing. Now, when it comes down to making sure this is successful, communication is a huge part of this, and you cannot over communicate. If you're trying to impose change and people don't understand what that change is, they don't understand what the impact to them is, they don't understand how long it's going to take and what that journey is going to look like every time. And the level of transformation
You just list a few really important things. So in order for this to be successful, a significant part of this success is communication. You cannot over communicate, but then when you communicate, putting it yourself in the shoes of the receiving, the employees. So being obviously the leader and what you should communicate concisely, because you've done it many times successfully. What made a difference? What are the key items that you will list in terms of the communication? What do they need to know in order for them to engage?
You've got to structure your communication. You've got to plan what you're actually going to say to people. Now, in a lot of this, when I was communicating, sometimes in front of hundreds of people, where I would almost stand up on a box and talk to some people or talk to them at some point, is within your own mind. I wasn't a great one for having lots of notes. I'm a better one for standing and speaking from my heart and my head, because I also believe that leaders should know their business. If leaders know their business, they should be able to stand up and talk, because they're talking about something that they're already informed and knowledgeable about. So for me, the first thing is you go through what is the change? This is what's important to the people.
Okay.
What is the change that you're talking about? So they need to understand whether you're going to go from a Ford Mondeo to, a BMW sports car. And then they got to kind of understand, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? Because otherwise, for these guys, it becomes change for change's sake. And if people understand the purpose, we know this from all kinds of work. As soon as people have worthwhile work with purpose, they will commit more to it. Then the big thing is impact. They have to understand the impact to the business and the impact to them. What does this mean for their working environment, their pay, their job security? How will their future look like? And equally, what they're going to be looking from a leader is that, one, you're sincere, you're authentic, you have empathy, and equally, you'll communicate things in a very simplistic and clear way. You will take any questions, good, bad, or indifferent, because there are no bad questions. Each leader, when they're going through this process, should not be doing anything emotionally. They should be doing everything in a calm, considered way, and they should consider every question, whether they're good questions, difficult questions, challenging questions. All of them are a blessing, right? Because I've been in situations where somebody's asked a question, and by the fact they asked this question, made us go away and double check something, and the guy asking the question was right. And he prevented, not a huge failure, but he prevented something that could have delayed the level of change that we wanted to achieve. So these things are environments where you can learn as well as give people confidence that you're going in the right direction.
So to summarize, communicate clearly what is the change. Then why? What's the
Purpose.
of this? Then you talk about communicating what's in there for them, like what how is this going to impact them personally? You know, that change in terms of really their own day-to-day life, right?
Yes. Yes. And the other thing about communication, additionally, to be fair, Marian, is, and I did this, and I've always done it, and I said, oh, you can never over communicate. I used to communicate this stuff until I was almost fed up of hearing myself speak about it.
Yeah.
Right. So when I get to the point of kind of being fed up of hearing my own voice speaking about it, I actually get to a point of knowing that, yes, okay, I might be communicating enough, because human beings are skeptical. They are naturally skeptical. Our job as leaders is to give them confidence, equally to understand how they may be feeling and be empathetic towards this, but it does not deter from the level of business change that has to be achieved.
You know, when you talk about, thank you for sharing this, but when you're in the financial and the CFO seat, often then there's a lot of investments that are needed to do.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you know, change things. So often this is related to technology or better systems, more efficiency, and you know, we've invested a lot in heavily in tech, or really improving processes and technology or systems, but we're not seeing the return on investment fast enough.
Yeah.
Why should we continue investing? How do we know this is not another expensive experiment or investment that may not yield the necessarily return within that time period?
Well, I mean, the one thing I would say about kind of CFOs more than CEOs, CFOs are naturally equally impatient human beings, right? When they spend money, they want to see money coming back next week. What you have to do with these investments and these transformational elements, and I mean, if you look at the European platform with the level of automation on new aircraft, or the positioning of some of the hubs, the gateways, or the vehicles, sustainability and everything else. Number one, sometimes doing the right thing is simply doing the right thing. And there's an element of this in some of the investments that we make. Then you look at the element you're talking about in terms of the transformation. You've got to really understand what you're investing in and why you're investing it, and how long will that return on the capital you're employing will basically deliver something. Now, you've also got to understand that, are all the deliverables fiscal? Are they quality driven? Are they service driven? What is it you're trying to achieve? And then you've got to have the right metrics to measure this over a given period of time, taking the basic rule of 7 data points, right? Because if you get 7 data points that are improving, you've got a trend. So for me, in terms of
Why
they all
7
succeed?
data points? What's this about?
The 7 data points is, if you can get, when you have a look at businesses, there's so many variables that will drive what you've got. And actually, do you know, I was talking to my mother at the weekend, which was hilarious, because she's going to this Weight Watchers thing, like all people, the people do, and it's really good. And my mother said to me, they told me that I'm not really consistently bringing down my pounds or my kilos until I'm doing it consistently for a period of weeks, because it will go up and down. So, for example, in week 1, you may be +2, then in week 2, you might be -1, then you're +2, -2. So if you can basically get a continuous process of improvement over 7 data points, over 7 weeks, then you've got a trend. Having something saying, hey, we were better last week, is just being better last week. Because unless you're better next week, the week after, the month after that, you don't have a trend. And the one thing that we do know, the first piece of improving performance is transparency. And the transparency in terms of being able to measure this, a trend is your friend. So if you could show a trend, a trend is your friend. If you can show a trend and the metrics have
What
to
if
be
it's a
clear.
negative trend?
Well, if it's a negative, then this is equally, whilst it's not where you want it to go, at least you're in a position that you can see where it's going and do something quick enough.
Yeah.
Because to find out that you've had a fire burning for 3 or 4 months, right, in a business where you're doing transformational change, for me is basically unacceptable. You need to know on a daily, weekly basis, what is the test? And one of those tests is the human beings and the communication. If you talk to people, you can gauge their feeling. You can understand their questions. You can understand the tone of voice they're using, their body language. You can feel how the organization is taking on the change. And the change has to be driven, promoted, and communicated by the most senior executives, because if it's driven from the top, it'll get changed.
Yeah. You say transformation is about people, but people resist change. So how do you stop that resistance from sabotaging the whole effort?
It's a known fact, right? There's a book that I read years ago, and it's a little bit academic, but it's called Immunity to Change. And it goes through all the psychological feelings that people have when they know something's coming up. They become insecure. They start becoming negative. They'll start rubbishing some of this change before it even takes effect, saying, "Oh, this is going to be bad." Get in amongst them, right? This whole communication piece, the only way that you will change people's minds is by, first of all, if you're going to do any kind of change, you should pilot something small. You should have a user acceptance test of this change in a certain way, including technology. So with technology, instead of actually rolling out a huge technological change, you should get whatever you're changing and put it into somewhere that you may have, I don't know, 10 people working with it, that you can prove the effectiveness and the efficiency of it within the 10. Then the 10 can be 20, be 30, be 40. But at least then when you're talking to people, you can demonstrate by presenting to them what you've done, who's done it. And there is nothing better, Marian, than getting a couple of what I would call disciples or ambassadors. So go and get some of the 10 who have been doing this to talk to the others, because then it's not something just dictated by leadership. It's something that their own peers, their own colleagues will say, guys, I've been working this and it actually does what it does. And you've got to let them be free about what they say, because we also had this. They said, this equipment is great. However, as the user, I think if it could also do A, B, and C, then it would be much better. Well, the A, B, and C were the first 3 modifications that we would make to that application to make sure that the user element, to make it more efficient, is built in and baked into the solution.
Thank you, Roy. And one question here that is really important for leadership, including, if I'm in that really position and say, okay, well, how do I know? And tell me honestly here, how do you know if my leadership team is even capable of delivering a transformation of scale? You tend to be very good in assessing people, but not every leader is. So I'm just really interested of how you assess them.
The first thing you have to do, which sometimes, if I'm being honest, frightens the life out of me when I talk to people and they really don't know their people. You've really got to get close to your people. You've got to know them. If you're really going to entrust them with any part of the business, especially if that's going to mean they're leading other people, right? Because one person managing 400 is one person influencing, for the good, better, or worse, 400 people and their families. So first of all, you've got to know your people. You got to know their strengths. You got to know their weaknesses. You've got to know if they are able to stand in front of people and confidently communicate. You've got to be able, in one of the previous webinars or podcasts that we did, I talked about having the right people on the bus. And then when you've got the right people on the bus, you got to make sure the right people are sitting in the right seats. You'll need a completer finisher. You'll need an executor. You'll need somebody who can basically helicopter view and make sure everything's going in the right direction. You'll need somebody who can keep track of the KPIs and keep track of the numbers. You need to clearly list all the stuff that you need. And, some of this should be second nature at a senior level as well. You've got to get the right people. And here's the thing, where we say, oh, my people are too tired, they're too stretched, they're everything else. There's two fundamentals here. If this is going to be a really big, significant transformation, then what you should do is create a dedicated subgroup or a project team that can basically manage this and nothing else. To have everybody double hatting in this stuff basically puts risk around it that things don't get done on time or they just don't get done. So what I would normally do if I'm implementing a real big significant change, I would put a project team to manage that change. And as the change was concluding and it was completing, all this project team would go back into the business, into the roles that they either came out of, or they'd go into different roles. Some of them would get promoted. So there's the first element about making sure that you've got the right people and knowing your people. Because people who put 10 people into a team and they get it wrong fundamentally tells me they don't know their people. The second piece is, and I truly believe in this, achieving big goals takes no more energy than achieving small goals, because you're talking about action and execution along with managing your people. And for me, I would never within a business just let things ride along. I never felt comfortable letting things. I felt more comfortable when I was uncomfortable, because at least I'm then looking at the business. And even when I would walk into a country, I remember one guy saying to me, listen, we've got this great growth. And I said, okay, why? I said, and the answer for me wasn't clear enough. And I said, okay, but you've got to be not just inquisitive, you've got to be fascinated with why. Because if your profit was going down, you would be really fascinated with what are the things that are causing the dilution in profitability. But equally, as you're growing, you've got to be fascinated by understanding the levers why you're growing, because if you don't, that growth isn't sustainable. In 6 months, 9 months, 10 months time, it might not be there. So you've got to understand it, whether it's growing or diminishing. So for me, be fascinated with what's happening. And, big goals take no more energy than small goals.
That's an interesting and observation, and I relate to it as well. But the problem sometimes I have is when my organization is stretched thin and employees are exhausted, how do I justify yet another major change without pushing the team over the edge?
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends equally what the individual reason for change is. I mean, in some cases, I've seen change. I mean, we going back, 20 years ago, when we were looking down the barrels of another year of loss, the reason for change for us was easy and it was clear to explain. And, we did not hold back from the truth. We put the numbers up and said, guys, we're going to make some radical change. We're equally going to change the way that we lead human beings. We're going to go to a people-driven organization. However, we need to streamline. We need to plug the hole in the bucket and stop the leakage. And we've got to become profitable and we've got to be able to sit. So if you understand the reason and it's compelling in a sense of, if we don't do this, this will happen. And you know, where people say, but I've got a team that's tired, and I've got a team that's exhausted, and I kind of go, okay, so I've either got an issue with the leader or I've got an issue with the team. And either one of them needs to be renewed, because you can't go into a huge transformation with people who are saying, I'm exhausted. And
Yeah.
that could be the truth, but you fundamentally can't do it, because any transformation, right? If you've got the right culture in an organization, and we know this, right? It's said many times, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. Now, the reality of it is, if you've got the right people, and then you've got the right reason, rationale, and purpose for change, what it should do, it should re-energize those who may be feeling fatigued or tired. It might give them a sense of renewal. The fact that if what you're going to do in the longer term is to create a more sustainable platform, there has to be a reason why they're tired and fatigued and fed up and everything else. So you've got to change the environment that creates one of energy. I was very fortunate, but you know, I also had an incredible team. I mean, I said this in one of the last podcasts. I was blessed with the talent that I had. But what I actually did do in all of this, which helps transformation immensely, I had one simple rule about people being on my board. Nobody had a right to be on my board unless they truly loved human beings. And I believe in that, in a sense that if you want to lead people, you've got to love human beings. Otherwise, why would you want to lead people? You might as well become a plumber or an electrician. So if you employ people from a leadership perspective that love human beings, everything they do transformationally will always have empathy towards the people in the workplace. Now, that may not change the outcome of what you have to do. And if you end up with a slightly smaller workforce, or you change fundamentally some of the tasks that the people have, etc., all of that is just managing that change as you go through it. But at least people have empathy. They think people as well as process, but they don't get in the way to a degree that you have to have this balance between the respect element, which is all the stuff that you do in terms of making sure that people are in the best place that they can be without sacrificing any of the results.
Well, you know, one of the things that's what's really a counterintuitive lesson about transformation is that you wish you would learn early in your career.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I've been managing change transformation for, as you know, Marian, for many years. And I've always been a people leader.
For the audience, you manage a number of crisis situations, just to mention, from the volcano to terroristic attacks. There's a lot of things you've managed.
Yeah.
From
Yeah. I mean, re-engineering a network the size of what I had, first of all, was a huge undertaking. And you know, it took many years. It took almost 10 years. But I'm talking the re-engineering of a complete European platform of 42 countries. But equally baked into this, you're right, I managed a number of contingencies, from the ash cloud contingency to terrorist attacks, whether they be in Paris, in Brussels, the bombing when it happened in Istanbul airport. And all of these, you know, are the same in terms of transformational leadership, because leadership is situational. It's very much situational. Transformation is the same, because you've got to understand what you're going to expect, and you've got to expect the stuff you won't expect. That's unexpected. But for me, in terms of, you know, my lesson, I've always been complimented on my ability to engage with people and to get people to do stuff in a respectful way. But even with what I said, and which is why I said in the beginning, you can never over communicate. In the early days of managing change, one, I assumed people understood what I was saying without really checking it. And two, where I actually thought people, where I was communicating enough, I could have communicated more. Which is why today I say you can never over communicate. And, you know, my basic lesson and message to myself is to communicate so much that I'm fed up of hearing myself communicate about it. Because once I get to that level, I'm thinking, if everybody's fed up of hearing me communicate about this too, it means they all understand at least what's happening. So that would be my one of my bigger lessons when I was certainly a younger leader. And making sure that you have enough checkpoints along the way. You can go through, project management, Prince 2, you can go through all this kind of stuff. But when you're walking the floor and you're talking to people and you're interested and fascinated in what they do, and you listen to what they're saying, and you talk to individuals within the project team, not just the bosses. I would talk to everybody in these project teams, because every boss I've ever walked up to and said, "How's your business going?" They will all go, "Ah, yeah, it's going great." Then when I go and talk to the guys on the floor, they'll kind of go, "Well, maybe it's not going so great." So you will always make sure that you talk to people to get a proper health check of what's going on. And that for me was equally part of the communication, that you get them communicating up and me communicating down. So yeah, that was my lesson from the younger years, because not every change I put in when I was younger was successful.
I'm sure, and this is really what is so important, to take those lessons and really use them for leaders that really want to make a successful transformation of their business and help the company and people. What is the most underestimated reason transformation fails?
Commitment from the leadership.
Why don't we talk about it enough?
Well, yeah, it's true, Marian, and it doesn't talk enough. But leaders don't like speaking about their own weaknesses, right? Or where they have some shortfalls, because unfortunately within the leadership community, there's an ego, there's a macho, there's some, and it's becoming less and less. But commitment. I've always said, if you want to manage change, and if I want to really manage a transformational change, I have to be the biggest champion of that change. I've almost got to walk through the organization with a banner that has that change on the banner, and I'm constantly walking with this banner through the organization so people know how important it is to me and that I'm committed to it. We had one where, we had this position called our Certified International Training. And this for me.
By the way, is it true that you develop passports? Like
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
company, the UK
Yeah.
government run out
So
of
we
pay
we
because
gave
because of DHL passports.
Yeah. So and there was a story about this, that I was going through Cincinnati Airport with one of my bosses at the time, and he gave this passport, this training passport, to one of the guys at border control, who looked at it, gave it him back, and said, "Yes, you can go through." Um, so and that's a true story. But yeah, we created passports, and we would have the different training modules, and we would put stickers in there, we would put messages and sign it, and you create an energy and a culture for learning and a culture for developing. And what happened was, we had this role within the business that sat 3 levels below me within the organization. And this process of training and developing people is one of the most important things for me, especially for those frontline supervisors who are managing 70% of the people within most organizations. So, in the same as managing transformation, what did I do? Is I got the guy in charge of this, and I put him 3 levels up on my board, directly reporting to me, so the entire organization can kind of go, he says this is important. I didn't have to say, by the way, guys, this is important. The fact that this was elevated onto my board to report directly to me, and I kept talking about this training and development of the frontline supervisors, gave a very clear message to everybody that this was, 1, important to me, 2, I was championing this, and every country or every network hub or every single aviation entity, I would sit and say, "Where are you with your training? Where are you with the development of people? Can you get..." And the first conversation that I would have in a business review, and in fact the European board would have in a business review, would be about people development, would be about employee engagement, would be about active leadership before we talk about the numbers. Because if you're leading your people and you're managing your people right, the numbers in the P&L are called a result for a reason. They're called a result because they're a result of how you're managing and leading your business. So if you manage your people correctly, if your commercial guys know what they've got to go after, if they know they're heading for field sales, SME, key accounts, your guys in operations know what they're doing service quality wise, and they've got all the focus areas, then once you've actually led your people and you've got them performing, the P&L, with the exception of what happens below the line with the free cash flow, operating cash flow, capex, investment, but everything to EBIT basically would almost take care of itself.
Well, Roy, if you had let's say, an opportunity or magic one, as we say, to fix one major challenge in transformation today, globally we're talking here, what would it be?
The area that I believe that is the most challenging today in transformation is people's overall ability to execute without fear.
Okay.
If you look at leaders, and you know, I've seen people respectfully who can talk a good job, they can talk about all the people stuff, they can energize people. These guys have energy themselves, they're passionate about what they do, and I've watched people almost run a marathon, and by the time they get to the finish line, they can't put their foot over the line. Why? Because with execution comes accountability. If it goes right or comes wrong, and dependent upon the size of this, when people are accountable for the execution and the change, it actually installs a little bit of fear, you know, of what if I'm wrong. We talked in one of our other sessions, and you know, when we were talking about some of the stuff that I'd done historically, I executed without fear. It doesn't mean I was reckless. It doesn't mean that I hadn't done all the homework and we hadn't analyzed everything. But when a decision was made, I wouldn't stop at the finish line, because I would make sure that I'd want to get over the finish line as quick as I could, right? But as responsible, not reckless, in control, but I wouldn't hesitate. The problem that I think with a lack of execution, once you've committed to what you're doing, if you hesitate, this is this almost, you know, a soldier saying, ready, aim, ready, aim, ready, aim. Oh, hell, I've just been shot in the butt. So you've got to say, ready, aim, fire, right? You've got to be able to fire. And you won't get all of it right. And you've got to have a mindset that if it doesn't go right, it's an opportunity to learn. And for me, execution is the thing that people are not the best at, because it also makes them accountable.
I wonder why it hasn't been solved yet.
Do you know why? Because human beings are human beings. And people are people. I was very fortunate, you know, my guys who would do this stuff, they would execute, they would do things. If it didn't go right, they would equally be honest with me and tell me where it didn't go right. You've got to be able to create a culture where there's no fear. If you believe, I honestly believe
You just said something very important. Got to create a culture where there's no fear. Yeah. So how do you create that culture?
He or she, basically, first of all, back to my original piece, has to be a people leader. All leaders have to be people leaders to begin with. And yes, okay, they then may be engineering, they may be finance, they may be commercial, they may be HR, operations, whatever. But they've got to be people leaders first. If you've got an empathetic leader, then you will be able to, and also calm leadership, right? Every single person who would come to me and tell me something had gone wrong knew what my reaction and response would be before they told me, because I was always calm. So
the critical thing to create a culture of no fear, and therefore growth, innovation, and really positive transformation, is your first reaction when there's a problem.
Yeah.
And if you react calmly, you're on the winning.
Can I explain this in a little bit more detail, please, Marian? Because I think what you're hitting on right now is probably more important than what you realize. And I mean this sincerely from an energy point of view, right? Because I don't believe any human being wakes up in the morning and goes, yes, I'm going to have a bad day at work today and make some big mistakes, right? That's not what they do. People generally want to come to work and have a good day. Now, when they come to work and have a good day, their energy level will be here. When they make a mistake, what happens to that energy level? It goes down. What's our job as leaders?
Bring it back
To
up.
bring the energy level back up. Our job is to get people performing. You won't get people performing if their energy level is diluted. Now, the worst leaders, and I have seen this, the worst leaders will have people with an energy level here. The guy will make a mistake. Energy comes to here. Walks and tell his boss he's made a mistake. The boss says to him, "You idiot, what were you thinking of? How much has this cost me? Good Lord, this is just terrible. What were you thinking of?" What's happened to his energy level?
It goes down completely.
Further down. There's no way that human being is going to be performing. So now you're in a position where his energy was here, or her energy, it came down with a mistake, and you're supposed to be able to bring it back up. And what happens is you get leaders, which is equally why this stuff fails, because people get into a blame culture that creates a fear culture. And then what happens is this energy, once it's down here, to try and get it even back up to here is a mountain to climb, because the initial reaction and response to the mistake or the fact something's gone wrong has diminished all trust, all confidence. So these guys, you as the boss, they will have no trust in you.
I heard that this can take even years to restore. So the question here I have is, what is the opposite reaction? So let's play a role. Okay, I made a mistake, and I say, Roy, I messed up here. What would be a great leader response to bring back the energy? How would you handle?
That's a brilliant question, Marian. So you walk into me and say, Roy, I've got to fess up. I've got to be straight with you. I've made a mistake. I think it's going to cost about 2 million. This is what it is. And I kind of say, okay, so explain to me what has happened so I fully understand the situation. So then the explanation will happen. I'll go, okay, great. So where are we? I've understood what's gone wrong, but exactly where are we? And then they'll explain where it is. And I'll say, okay, how do we get it back on track? Is there an opportunity to be able to recover the situation? What is it you need from me in resources or assets to be able to get back to where we should be? Is there an opportunity to not just recover, but to go beyond recovery? You ask questions, and if you notice, I didn't say blame. I didn't call him an idiot. I never said, what are you thinking of? I never said, good Lord, you've just cost me a fortune. Everything is a pragmatic question about how do we recover, which in essence, you're also bringing them in and asking their valued solution of what they think. And at the end of it, and this is the most important thing, at the end of the conversation that you have about getting back on track, you reiterate a couple of things. The first one is, Marian, trust me, I have done things that have not gone right before. This is part and part for the course. So, number one, I trust you. I've got all the confidence in you that we can get this back on track. Number two, whatever it is you need from me, you make sure you come and see me, and I will make sure that I give you what you need, because this project's important and we need to get over the finish line. So that's how I would normally end the conversation on this. And if you think, Marian, so there's the energy's come here. Now, having that level of conversation, and this is direct feedback that I've had a long time after some of these projects have passed. So having that conversation and finishing the way you finish, the energy level doesn't go back to where it was before. It actually goes above.
Wow.
Because they've been treated respectfully. You told them you've trusted them. You still trust them. You still have confidence. And I am here to help you, because this is my problem. It's a business problem, not your problem.
I'm just here summarizing. It sounds like this is one of the most important things for transformation. That would you just explain how to react when there's a problem. And I was going to ask you a question, and still will. What is the one misconception about transformation you would like to debunk?
The one misconception, actually, is that it's not necessary, because it is. If you go back and read the books, even yesteryear, from people like Peter Drucker, and and it is so true. If the speed of change within your organization is not equal to the speed of change in the marketplace, your business is going backwards. And somebody in today's years with technology the way it is will always have the ability to quantum leap and overtake you. So, you know, the only thing consistent about the environment today is the necessity to change. The world is changing at a quicker pace than what we can keep up. So if you can accelerate in a very controlled way. And Marian, we've talked about this, you know, off screen. This stuff equally isn't easy for leaders, and it takes energy and it takes commitment. You've got to put quality time into this. This isn't something that you can just do with lip service. So you've got to be committed. You've got to believe. You've got to be able to do it and stand in front of people and say stuff with confidence and have people challenge you. And be grateful they are challenging you, because they're only doing it because they feel insecure, or they may question what you're doing. And that's their right to do so, because, you know, it's their livelihood as well at the end of the day.
Roy, thank you. This has been really helpful. And I really kind of taken a very interesting point here earlier, what you just mentioned, and now I completely agree that we should continuously transform every day, even as human beings, hopefully for the better. That's what we should focus. How can we become better than we were yesterday? And what's the thing we need to do? It's similar with companies. If we don't transform positively, then yeah, you'll be overtaken or you'll not survive, or the other one is the worst is to go negative or backwards.
Yeah.
But here's something practical, and this is my really to finish this episode today, and very practically for a CEOs, that if a CEO right now is listening to this episode, and they want to take one action on Monday morning, what should it be?
Hopefully they can gain some benefit from the lessons that I've learned over many years, is to go in Monday morning, do a check on their transformation, fully understand what's happening, why it's happening, how it's happening, and to start talking to people about it. And I don't mean holding committee meetings and talking to people about it. I used to have a philosophy in work that if I walked through a corridor past 5 people and I never said, good morning, how are you? I had just missed 5 valuable opportunities to get feedback. Because if they communicate and talk, and if you want a real litmus test on how the transformation is going, then have your project team meeting, but talk to people. Go and talk to people out in the business, because sometimes, you know, as CEOs, our offices are busy, our agendas are busy, but fundamentally,
so when you talk people in their place, the guard is down, and you can really meet them.
yeah.
Own environment rather than just coming to you and escalating.
Correct. I mean, the biggest compliment I used to have from people is when I used to stop and talk to them, and they used to tell me all kinds of stuff. And I tell you, some of the stuff I couldn't even repeat on here. But they used to what they used to say was, after I've had 5 minutes of a coffee with you or a talk with you, I forget that you're the boss. It kind of leaves my brain that I'm talking to the boss. And you see people talking more naturally. They give more naturally. And when they're doing this, they're equally being sincere, because it's their natural self, because you're putting yourselves in an environment where I would love to always bring myself to them and not expect them to come to me.
Here's a couple of takeaways that I'll suggest to a CEO for execution on Monday morning, in addition to what you just said. So to make it 3, you know, first of all, for many of you may not know, but Roy had on his desk a sign that says, "Why are you here?"
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Maybe that's the first thing I probably will put on the desk of a CEO office, and say, "Why are you here?" So just to remind you, you need to be amongst your people or clients.
Nothing happened in my office.
Exactly, because your office is your office, and then if you're at least in your office, you better make it worthwhile to be in that office. So real productive. So be amongst people, because you're gonna learn a lot more and gonna be a lot more insightful. A second lesson is your first reaction when there's a problem. Master that, what Roy said and how he reacts when there's a problem. You know, as you just said, really calmly, pragmatically, and bring back the energy of the leader. Make sure that they feel, well, you trust them and they feel supported to create that level of engagement. That will open up innovation, growth. The opposite is will kill innovation. You'll become a bottleneck, and the company will suffer. And it takes years to repair. So when you have an ego, when you're angry, when you're the most, just train to react in a very pragmatic and caring way. Because if you don't, you may be wasting years of your time as leaders and CEOs. So please do listen.
And Marian, may I say, any CEO who has an ego, for me, I'd say lose the ego.
Yes.
In businesses, let me tell you, I said this, I said this. I used to always say the only thing in the business that should have an ego is the business itself, none of the people inside it.
Love it. And most, to be honest, let's not forget, when you have an ego, a small reminder, people will honor you, respect you, not you, but actually very often your position.
Yeah.
And remember that when you're no longer a CEO, you don't have the privileges that you
Yeah.
have.
When you're no longer a CEO, you're just Roy.
Exactly. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Roy, it's been an absolute blessing. Thank you so much for joining us again and sharing those insights. These are real practical lessons from one of the most successful corporate turnarounds in history of more than 110,000 people company, from losing a couple of billion or more than a billion loss to almost 4 billion of profit turnarounds. That's what we're talking about. A large transformation turnaround at scale where Roy played a key role into this. So here's the reason why you should listen to those lessons, because this is going to save you years of time and pain
And money.
sorrow, and hopefully can create a better environment for your people, your team, and that will have a positive impact. As you know, we're champions of promoting and helping people thrive at work, and we believe that starts from the head, from the leader. So be the leader, be the change you want to see around you, lead by example, help people thrive at work, and really not just look at the success, but how do you get there? Equally important, because that's going to make a profound difference. That's my takeaway, and I really appreciate you, Roy, and thank you so much for joining us for
Thank
this.
you, Marian. It's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you.